I can't see the counter with the screen up.
All right, Chris, but bear in mind people can hear you, so all right.
Absolutely.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, or indeed good morning, depending on where you are around the world. Welcome to this presentation. My name's Mark Bailey. I'm the technical host here this afternoon. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to the President of the Royal, Mr. Richard Stock, and he will then be introducing our lead presenter. What we'll be doing this afternoon, Chris Harmon, the presenter, will obviously give a presentation, and then at the end of it, we'll be having a Q&A session. This is a webinar, so the Q&A session can be conducted through the question and answers facility. You'll find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a box marked Q&A. When you click on it, you're able to type the question into that Q&A box. And I will then be able to share that with the presenter. So I think that's enough from me at this stage. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Stock.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody from around the world. Welcome to the Royal Philatelic Society, London. And this presentation this afternoon is on the work of the expert committee. Now, the expert committee of the Society has been in place for many, many years, and it provides a very important service to members and collectors generally worldwide in expertising items, philatelic items, whether they be stamps or postal history, official material as well. And that gives collectors confidence that the item that they have, which may or may not have been questioned as to its genuineness, has a certificate telling them whether or not, in the opinion of the expert committee of the Royal, it is in fact genuine or that it isn't genuine. So I would like now to hand over to Chris Harmon, who is the chairman of the expert committee. Chris is a past president of the Society. He's a signatory of the Royal Roll of Distinguished Philatelists and is an honorary fellow of the Society. He has been involved with the work of the expert committee since the early 1980s and has been chairman of the committee for many years. So without any further comment from me, may I introduce our expert on the expert committee, the chairman, Chris Harmon. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much. What I want to do is talk a bit about the expert committee itself, our work and how we do it, and one or two pointers on matters of that. But the main part of this talk actually is looking at stamps. It's looking at items that some of them as a caveat to the viewer, some of them to explain some of the history of forgery, and some of them some of the conundrums that we face when we expertise. And this opening slide is our new home, the new home of the Royal Philatelic Society, London. We have our offices on the 3rd floor of that, in an area that most can't get to because we're obviously dealing with third-party material, and our deliberations are confidential. This is our main room, and what you will see there are our photographic records and our forgery records in the background. We have expertised something over 230,000 items since the committee was formed in April 1894. It was decided at that time by the Society, then it was called the Philatelic Society London, that forgeries were a problem, and that one of the contributions to the safety of collecting and dealing and auctions was to opine upon the genuine nature or otherwise of material, and that a certificate should be issued. Part of that decision was in fact that there would be a photograph taken of the patient, and the photograph would be stuck onto the certificate and sealed with the seal of the society. And that is still very much what we do today. Our goal is to get to the truth of material. Sometimes that is relatively straightforward. A lot of the time it is not straightforward. We don't, by definition, normally see the easy things. It's the ones that are puzzling people that come to the expert committees. And I will show you in a minute what the certificates actually say. So we have reference material. The Royal Philatelic Society itself has a number of reference collections, but we have access by invitation to the collection of Her Majesty the Queen, and we take things to what is certainly the finest collection of British Empire in existence to compare. And we use it particularly for shades and for overprints and similar things. We also consult the Tapling collection in the British Library and other museum collections such as the National Postal Museum in the UK. We also have consultants that we use. On certain specialist areas, there are people with a very high degree of knowledge, and we ask them for their opinions. The opinion remains ours, but we listen to what they think, and that is extremely helpful. And a number of things at every meeting go to consultants in specialist areas like UK departmental overprints and similar things like that. We have some technology. This is the VSC, Video Spectral Comparator, which allows us to see patients under varying light sources, everything from infrared through to ultraviolet, and through various filters. And the guy who works it most of the time is Professor Paul Leonard, who you see in the picture there. On the right is a high-powered Leica microscope, which allows us to look very closely at things as well. So this is probably the two key elements of technology that we use. But actually, the human eye is still probably the best judge, and the knowledge of what nefarious deeds people can get up to, and knowledge of printing processes and knowledge of inks, and that resides really with members of the committee. It's quite laborious, so people sometimes think that we take a long time to do things, but the processing of it takes its time. The photographing, the writing up certificates, the research behind the decisions, because we often refer to our own records, and in order to get to what we believe to be the true opinion. I confess, we don't always get it right. What I would say to somebody, if they think we have made a mistake, then please send it back to us. We'll have another look. Tell us what you think is wrong. As always, the one that we miss is remembered, and the 99 that we get right is taken for granted. These are two of the people who are doing the work behind the scenes in the writing up of the certificates. The certificates themselves, from the very start, a bad certificate, something which where there is something wrong, a forgery, a stamp that's been heavily repaired so that it no longer really represents the issued stamp, have multiple signatures on, a minimum of 4. For a good certificate, so genuine, with no real major qualifications, it is the signature of the chairman or other representative only. So there's the picture of the two certificates. The one on the left, in fact, was sent to us by the keeper of the Privy Purse. So it's an item out of the Queen's collection that was sold in 2001. The other one came from my own collection, and I often make sure we record some of these bad things, but so that if we do see them again, we have a record of them. This particular set of slides is on the Royal website, and so you can see it at your leisure. And I think rather than talking too much about the process that it goes through, you could look at that and see what we do and how we do it. So I will not spend a great deal of time on that particular slide. The meeting dates, we have been recently, we started work again in about June, the end of June this year, having closed down like most businesses in March. And since then, there has been people in every week clearing the backlog and operating as close as we can get to business as usual. Some of the committee members have not been present, but a core of them have been present, so that has enabled us to come to conclusions. The November meeting is probably going to be the first sort of full meeting back in the room. The September one has been held slightly on a day-by-day basis. Pricing wise, the base price is £35 plus VAT if it applies to you. On higher value items, we charge a percentage of the catalogue value. And so both members of the Royal Philatelic Society London and the Philatelic Traders Society actually get discounts from these prices here. So and as you see, we would reckon the normal turnaround time is probably about 8 weeks you should allow, depending on when you send something in and the next committee meeting is. That is purely showing what we're doing today. So I will move on now to some items to show you some of the things that we that come to puzzle us and challenge us. I start with reprints of the Post Office Mauritius. One of the reasons I put these up is that there's actually a lot of forgeries of these around at the moment. Most that you see on eBay are forgeries. These are genuine reprints made in 1912. They were made in 3 different colors. The 2 colored ones always have reprint with a hand stamp on the back behind the stamp itself. And most of the modern ones do not have reprint on it. They do, however, have the pattern of the plate. So they are very deceptive indeed. And so be extremely careful in terms of in buying these. The colored ones are not that scarce as the genuine ones, the genuine reprints, I should say. But the black one is quite a scarce item. The colored ones you see quite often in auctions. The early stamps of India were extensively reprinted in the 1890s, and the new stones were laid down using the original dies, and numbers were printed there. These obviously can be used as the base for making deceptive fakes of the original. They're on no watermark paper when the originals obviously are on a watermark paper, for those that know. But it is quite possible to try and fake watermark paper, and we see a number of that type of thing. Obviously, a sheet of 12 of the wide 4 annas would be a world rarity of huge price. They're very attractive, and we have a collection of these in the society. Forgery did not start with postage stamps. This is a revenue forgery of a banknote revenue duty stamp. Now, this was a much more dangerous thing than defrauding a stamp collector. The penalty for defrauding the revenue in up to 1830 was death. And so if you were caught passing this banknote, you didn't have to have made it yourself, but if you tried to exchange it, or then you potentially face the death penalty. After 1830, it was slightly more lenient, and you were probably transported to Australia. This one is relatively easy to tell because the duty on a £5 note, which is 1 shilling and threepence, as you can see on both of those, but the correct £5 1 shilling and threepence duty should have the king's head in the middle, and this has got the Georgian dragon in the middle. The Georgian dragon is used for the 5p duty on pound note stamps, and so not a very good effort, but quite deceptive, some of these. There are a number of them around. When it comes to stamps, many of the forgeries that people see date to the very early days of collecting. These are Sparrow forgeries, and they date really to the 1860s and 1870s. They were printed in quantity, and when they sold out, they redid the printing stone, and they printed another lot. So you quite often get varieties of Sparrows with slightly different designs. And here's some examples for Queensland, where you've got 3 different designs. 2 of them look similar, but there's some slight differences, and one of them is very different indeed. The one at the bottom is a perfectly genuine first issue 6p stamp. The Sparrows were printed in sheets of 25 mostly, and one of the distinguishing features is the postmarks on them, or obliterations, not really postmarks. They used a series of obliterations, similar ones across many different countries, or stamps of their forgeries from many different countries. And there's a couple of examples of the Yellow Egypt and the Suez Canal Company, showing those sheets of 25. Now, the sheets of 25 were not necessarily printed one at a time. Sometimes on the lithographic stone there was room for more than one sheet of 25, and so you get multiple sheets maybe that haven't been trimmed off. For instance, in my collection, I have got a triplet of one of the early Brazil stamps on that. Samuel Allen Taylor was, unlike the Sparrow brothers, who basically sold stamps to fill holes in stamp albums, so you could buy cheaply things that looked like the real thing but weren't the real thing. Samuel Allen Taylor was very definitely aimed to extract as much money from the collector as he could, and he was a member of what was generally called the Boston Gang, and lived on the East Coast. He was actually in New York when he invented one new value, and then after another new value of Prince Edward Island. And he managed to persuade the dealers in Nassau Street, who loved something new to sell to their customers, to buy off him one of these values. And it wasn't until they wrote to Prince Edward Island asking, can we please have some sheets of these for our customers, that they were told there's never been such a thing as a 10-cent stamp for the Prince Edward Island. Obviously, he couldn't do that with the second stamp that he invented, or the second new value that he invented. And he got around that by lacing the rubbish bins outside the offices with envelopes and containing his with his new stamps on. And the office boys, they made their pocket money by looking through this rubbish and picking off the stamps and selling them to the stamp dealers. And so he was able to provide the office boys with examples of this, and he obviously made money on that. And again, that was discovered when one of the dealers wrote to the postmaster of Prince Edward Island and was told, yet again, no, we don't have the 15-cent value either. This is, I think, my favorite forger, who is George Kirk Jeffries. Was a very skilled engraver, worked in London, part of what is normally known as the London Gang or the Cullum Street Gang, worked in the City of London, and engraved by hand a number of forgeries, mostly British Empire. We know, it's one of the few forgers where we actually know that he did these. And the reason we know that is that all the plates are now in the Museum of the Royal Philatelic Society. And they are extremely skilled representations. The one at the top with the postmark, without that postmark on, you could probably start to see the differences, but with that postmark on, it is very, very hard. It's a very good representation indeed of the original, so very dangerous forgery. And the remark at the bottom from one of the early books, this is the best counterfeit that I've ever seen, I think is probably counts as a proper comment. This was his Grenada the Grenada revenue stamp that he did, where the base stamp he engraved, and then there were overprints. He overprinted various values, and he overprinted to represent the postage overprints of 1883. And we have all these implements at the Royal Philatelic Society. So we have the printing plate and we have the overprint settings. And so we're absolutely, there is very little doubt that he was the person that did these. George Jeffries, and his two accomplices, Benjamin and Sarpy, were jailed in 1892 for fraud and served 6 months hard labor. One of their favorite things, it was to actually clean fiscally used stamps and put postal postmarks on them. And these are some British Caribbean ones, where these have all been fiscally used, they've been cleaned, which is why the colors aren't that good, and they've been given fake postmarks. Once you start to recognize these postmarks, you see them quite regularly. A lot of them are very good representations, but not quite perfect. We have the transparencies from the records of these in the archives of the expert committee, and so we can quite easily spot them because they're not quite perfect. John de Sorati is probably, he has the reputation for being one of the finest forgers. In some ways, yes, he is. It is probably the closest replication of the original design because they were done photographically. What Sorati was so good at was to take photographs of original stamps and print them onto paper where he had bleached out another stamp. So the paper is genuine, the watermark is genuine, the perforations are genuine. The postmark will also be genuine because he often didn't manage to bleach out the postmark, and he would print on top of that a new stamp. And so you look at all the obvious things. Has it got the correct watermark? Does the perforations measure? And that's not the right thing to be looking at. You should be looking at the design. Now, the designs are all photolitho, so they're done photographically and printed through a lithographic process, which means that you can actually tell by the printing on quite a lot of stamps. This is the Salon 24 cent, where the original stamp by De La Rue is printed typographically, not lithographically. And so you've got the lithographic orange and you've got the typographic green there. It doesn't show that well here, but the look of the two, when you get your eye in, is reasonably easy to tell. These are more Sorati. He rather liked the Barquitos issue of Buenos Aires, and there's a number of forgeries of the different values of that. The two genuine coloured ones at the bottom, and as you can see here, he also forged the postmark. So sometimes the postmarks on his stamps were already on the bleached paper, and so so the design is printed on top. These particular ones he started from scratch, and he when he printed them in colour, he put a postmark on them. As you see, he was proud of his work, and he signed these die proofs even reproduction forbidden at the top, which is a bit rich from coming from a forger. This rather shady gentleman, Lucian Smeats, operated in Belgium in the Edwardian period, and he did a similar technique to Sorati in terms of bleaching out all or part of a design and printing on top of it. He did not, however, do reproduce photographically on top of that bleached paper, and so they're much cruder. But it's a similar process. There is the potential that Sorati actually worked with him for a time, because Sorati was in Belgium before he ended up in France. And as you can see on the left, you've got the genuine stamp, and at the top you can see that what might have originally been a 2-cent Honduras is now a £1 Sierra Leone. And at the bottom you see the wrong color value tablet. So you've got postage and revenue that had a green tablet, postage and postage had a red tablet, and the one in the middle is postage and postage with a forged green tablet. Erasmo and Nelia, these were sold not to fool the collector by the maker. They were sold as high quality reproductions, and they were indeed very high quality reproductions. They were engraved. In fact, they weren't hand engraved. They were engraved by some mechanical process, but really rather attractive stamps. The interesting thing about those is the perforations aren't really perforations at all. They're cut out of they're printed singly, and they're cut out in a sort of pastry cooker, if you like. You can see when you start looking closely at the perforations, they're not a round hole that's been punched. They're a sort of wavy line, or most of them are. Some of them are perforated, but these are all done like that. Attractive and desirable forgeries. They're not that rare, but they're quite scarce. This is a well-known forgery. If you are a member of the Royal Philatelic Society London, you will have seen an article by Jane Mowbray in the May edition of the London Philatelist this year, on the JC forgery. It's been known for over 100 years. There are examples where people have said that they are proofs. When you look at it like this, and you look at the genuine line engraved on the left with the lithograph forgery on the right, it is not the same quality. It is not a proof, it is a forgery. And it's quite a rare forgery. There's probably only half a dozen of them known. One of the things that the VSC does show us well is postmarks that have been removed. Many of the high values of the British Empire in particular were used for revenue purposes. And this one has been used for revenue purposes, and under various filters and lights. Here it is, you suddenly see a stamp that you cannot see in daylight, that it's got anything wrong with it. All of a sudden, you've got the residue of that fiscal postmark, which jumps out at you. The postage postmarks themselves are complete forgeries. So you have here a perfectly good fiscal stamp that has really been ruined by having the fiscal cancel bleached out and a fake cancellation put in its place. One of the things you get things which give you become a conundrum, because what are these? Where did these come from? If you look at the two on the right, they are printed in the same way as the original stamps. They're printed in different color to the issued stamps. They look in their way perfectly genuine. Are they color trials? Are they plate proofs? What are they? Unless you know something about the sort of what's happened to some of these, and you suddenly find that here we are in Eurostamp 1962 at the London Stamp Exhibition. They actually got permission to print these stamps from the original plates or makeup from the original dies in different colors to the issued stamp. So potentially very easy to deceive somebody if you don't know where they came from. I bought these actually off eBay. I thought they were rather fun. In theory, they're a doubling of the black. In practice, they're actually only a doubling of part of the black. It just shows you really what you can do with a modern printer, a scanner and a printer. I thought they were examples of what's possible. And as you can imagine, you can do a lot. These aren't very deceptive because the whole of the black isn't reproduced, but you can imagine how one could make deceptive things. This is an outright forgery on the right. The quality shows you pretty much it's nothing like the genuine on the left. This is a very rare variety where there's an extra Chinese character above the question mark. And we see two types of forgery of this. We see this, which is an absolute forgery. We also see a genuine stamp where somebody has tried to ink in that additional character. So we get a genuine stamp with an added character in there. And both of those are the sort of thing that we see. What initially seems to be quite a decent cover, a shilling rate from Grenada. It's a correct rate. The red 11 in the bottom left corner is correct in terms of the accounting split. It's got postmarks Grenada. It's got the receiving mark of Northampton. Doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it until you look very closely at that Grenada postmark, and it's actually done in pencil. I suspect this envelope never went anywhere near Grenada. I don't know where it came from, but the stamps have been genuine stamps and have been added to a cover, and the date stamp has been penciled in on the back. People are suspicious of Mexico, and it's quite a difficult country to collect in some ways. It had this system whereby when stamps were distributed from the main offices to the provinces, before they were issued, they were given a district overprint as a sort of what would you call it? It would be a bona fide status that they are received and they are valid for postage. You get both those overprints and you get covers faked. These ones happen to come out of a collection of faked made by Raoul de Thuin, who made masses of this type of thing. Certainly the postmarks are faked. The bisect on the right is faked. I haven't looked closely at whether the Chihuahua on the left one or the Jalapa on the right one is actually a faked overprint, because these unoverprinted stamps were also available. And so I suspect they're probably genuine because they're both quite common district overprints, but we haven't checked that. But in coming to a conclusion on this, there are 2 or 3 things you've got to look at. What's happened is quite simply, these are pre-stamp envelopes without any stamps on that have been enhanced with a stamp and to increase their value. Rather similar to this. These came out of Stanley Gibbons' archives at one stage. They sold a few of them, and these are Italian state stamps where they are quite common and cheap unused, and extremely expensive used. I mean, the cover, the 4-color cover on the left, would be tens of thousands of pounds if it was genuine, because it's got the very rare 50 grana and 20 grana used in combination with 2 other values. And the 6 Baiocchi of Romagna as well is a very rare stamp used. Almost everything on those envelopes is faked. I think the address was probably there originally, and probably the Napoli there is probably genuine as well. But otherwise, almost everything else has been faked there. Modern printing techniques allow faked overprints to be done quite easily. These are the cancelled plus the cut in the middle comes from booklets. As you can see, the halfpenny is not a booklet stamp, and the twopenny halfpenny never appeared in booklets. And when you start looking closely at that overprint, you see it's a modern laser printing. It is not a hand stamp, which is what it should be. We see this type of thing, both things like official overprints of GB and specimen and cancel overprints generally. We see quite a lot of this thing. I think laser printing, we've learned quite a lot about how to distinguish that. These are probably faked, could be somebody has got hold of the original date stamp. The top ones are used well out of date. People collected fine used, and therefore getting fine used from small islands was very difficult. So what do? You print, you postmark your own. Madame Joseph, there are 2 books published by the Royal on the Madame Joseph postmarks. These are not Madame Joseph, but they are similar to that. At best, these would be obliterated by favour, but probably faked. A nice looking 4-margin penny black. Well, not so nice really. When you look at it closely, the top margin and left margin have been added. It's a damaged stamp that has been made into a better looking stamp on that. And the postmark has been nicely touched up on the left over the added margin of that. So quite a lot of hard work gone into this, but definitely a manipulated stamp. Rather the same here. The Queensland clean cut perforation of 1861, unused, is an extremely rare stamp. The one on the left is perfectly genuine. The one on the right probably started out life is either as a damaged clean cut or a rough perf one. The rough perf is much commoner, and what's been happened is that this has been rebacked. Some of the frame lines have been painted in and parts of the design, and it has been given the clean cut perforations. So that sort of thing we see quite a lot of. The amount of time and effort and skill that's gone into some of these is really quite high. This one, again, for those who know Queensland, that little blemish there shows it's plate 2. And so it can't be the 1860 imperforate issue with the large star watermark. And in any case, it has a sideways watermark, which doesn't exist, can't exist actually of the original, and the watermark is very misshapen. So it's a later stamp that has been rebacked and given a different watermark. Sorry. One of the problems of Tasmania is that postage stamps were allowed for fiscal usage, and here we have fiscally used. You can see the manuscript on these that has been cleaned off, and here you've got a relatively clean looking block. A pity. One of the things that happened, in fact, was that quite a few of the postage stamps also had manuscript postmarks, because local post offices, smaller post offices, did not actually have their own hand stamp. And a number of these very rare locally post manuscript cancellations have been cleaned off and tried to make look unused. They would be a very desirable thing indeed as a postal postmark. So somebody has ruined a perfectly good stamp. This new variety came across. There's a famous Trinidad, one of the rare Trinidad stamps, of the penny black and red of this set with the missing value. This came to us from Kelleher, in fact, and is shown with their permission. And it was a new missing value. It was a missing 2 pence halfpenny. I think to me, the most interesting thing here is you can see quite easily that the value has been bleached out. But the most interesting thing is that it's been bleached out, it seems, without really damaging the color. This is blued paper, and it hasn't really damaged the blued paper. It is much the same as the genuine. And so when you think it would be impossible to bleach out something like that without taking away the color of the paper, you would be wrong. Somebody has managed it here. One of the swan varieties of the Dillaroo printing of the swan of Western Australia, the 6p purple was there was actually a 2p purple, an error of color. Maybe only one sheet printed. And we see from time to time 2p where the 6p has been bleached out and 2p has been painted in, and as you can see, under certain filters that becomes very obvious. We looked at it under all sorts of lights, and interestingly enough, not all of them showed it very well at all. So the wide range of different filters of the VSC, all of a sudden we found the right one, and there it was. This is a stamp that's actually in the Gibbons catalogue as a shade of the pound Machin, the pre-decimal Machin, and there is a forensic report saying that it's printed in sort of contaminated mixed inks, if you like, a mixture of the blue and the black, hence you get a blue-black stamp. That's not the case, actually. It is a stamp that has been contaminated by being stored in a blue plastic folder. And as you can see, what you're actually looking at is you're not looking at blue back ink. What you're looking at is black ink on a blue background. So you look at the blue squares there and you look at the white squares there. And the human eye sees the whole color as blue-black. We know where the sheet came from. We know its history, and it shouldn't really be in the catalogue, I'm afraid, but it is still currently. Just a couple of finishing points where we occasionally see something that is hugely spectacular and rare. This is the famous, unique 1 cent black and magenta of British Guiana. Not a wonderful looking stamp, but perfectly genuine. It was seen in 1935 by Sir John Wilson, and it was seen by Sir Edward Denny Bacon in the 1890s when owned by Ferrari. And one of the things that Denny Bacon said was that there were white flecks showing on the front of the stamp, which are no longer there. And when you look at the back, you can see it's been painted over. Many of these early British Guiana have been painted slightly to cover these white flecks because it's a surface colored paper. It was obviously done when Ferrari owned it, because the coloring has obscured the Ferrari hand stamp there. And so what did he do? He put another one on there. And so this went on to fetch something over $9 million when sold by Sotheby's in New York. So we had, it was a nice item to see. And this was a new discovery. This stamp was bought in New Zealand in a collection with a lot of good early material in it. And it was thought probably it was a postal stationery cutout or something. No, it is not. It is what could be called the first stamp of Russia, issued 6 months before the imperial stamps. It was a post in the town of what is now Tbilisi, then known as Tiflis. There were 5 known examples of it. And we had a picture of one because we had Sir John Wilson's one. And this matched it very, very closely when we checked it. However, we did want to check the paper. There are forgeries of this. We know that, but they are very, very crude. And so I actually took it over to compare it with the example in the Smithsonian Museum. And we ran it through its paces with their own VSC and with various other bits of equipment that they had. And in our view, this is perfectly genuine. And so it's example number 6. And the story doesn't quite finish there. The owner of this, a member of the Royal and a New Zealander, was so pleased with his good fortune that when this was sold at Spink for something north of 150,000, he donated part of that to the Royal Philatelic Society's building fund. Hence, on the third floor of the building, we have the New Zealand room. And this is the reason we have the New Zealand room. So that is completes this presentation here, but there is time for some questions, and I think Mark Bailey is going to be organized. Thank you.
Yes, Chris, you're quite right. Thank you very much indeed. We'll come to the questions just in a second. Right. Okay. Yes, thank you very much. So the good news is that people have already provided some questions. And I'd like to start, if I may, Chris. People are obviously very interested in the subject about the watermarks on stamps. We've got two questions that relate to watermarks. The first one is, do you see the watermark behind a stamp to be a challenge in your job? On the certificate, do you list out what watermark the stamp it has?
Yes. A certificate basically describes the value, it describes the color, it describes the perforations, and it describes the watermark. And it describes any unusual things like obliterations, re-entries, varieties, etc. That is what we would try to get into the wording of a certificate. It would also make a comment on the gum. We do not use the word mint, but we use full gum, partial gum, heavily hinged, things like that to describe that.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to actually turn off your video because your image is a bit broken, if you see what I mean. But stick with us in terms of your sound. Right. Okay.
Okay.
No, technology. Okay. Now, on the subject of watermarks, Lloyd Nutter asks, since detecting watermarks are so important, would you comment on the pros and cons of electronic watermark detectors versus traditional watermark detection fluid?
Yeah, the modern electronic ones are normally very good. They vary a bit, but you can see most watermarks. Some watermarks are notoriously difficult. I mean, if you collect late 19th century Brazil, I mean, it's a complete nightmare. But most are easier than that. We do use watermark fluid with care. We use, in fact, we use petroleum spirit, sort of high quality petroleum spirit. There are certain stamps that we would not want to use that on, particularly some of the modern ones, because it may affect the inks. But normally we can, and actually holding it up to the light is not a bad idea as well. The traditional way that we've always done it.
Okay, thank you. Next question comes from Lynn, who asks, does the availability of modern tools and technology make it harder for you to detect the forgeries these days?
In certain areas, the answer is undoubtedly yes. One of the things that has become a thing one looks at very carefully are things like rare roots or postmarks on a cover. So, I mean, we had the other day a Chinese cover where the important thing was the route it had gone and the postal system that it had gone through. and therefore really the rest of the cover was fine, but we had to look very closely as to whether the postmark tying it to one of the treaty ports was correct or not. And in fact, it turned out to be forged. And that was probably the most important thing on the cover. And that becomes, with modern printing techniques, those things are a challenge. They're a real challenge.
Okay, thank you. A couple of people have asked the same question, so I think we'll take both the questions at once, as it were. This is with regard to where a certificate indicates that it's a bad, a so-called bad certificate. The question from Keith Burton is, do you give the details of what your reasons are for claiming that, for classifying something as a forgery? And allied to that, Marc-Anne Dave asks, what exactly does a bad certificate mean? He's observed in many of the cases of multi-sign certificates that in his opinion, the item seems to be a genuine. So can you please mention the important elements as to why typically something may be considered to be bad?
The easy one is it's a forgery. It can be so extensively repaired that it is no longer really representative of the original stamp. It can have had its color changed. It can have been cleaned of an obliteration. It can have had postmarks added to a cover, for instance, or stamps changed on a cover. There's all sorts, and we would give a brief description of why we think. I mean, that 10-pence salon that I showed, which was mine, it says has been so extensively repaired that it no longer represents the issued stamp, which I think is perfectly legitimate. That's exactly what and that is the sort of thing that we would say on that.
Okay, thank you. Now, yeah, the forgeries of this is from questions from Sebastian. The forgeries of the
I've got this, Mike. Mark, so shall I respond?
Yes, please. That one from Sebastian. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where these come from. They are very, very deceptive. And one of the quick and easy ways is to look at the back. They are done obviously from they look like engraved, but I think they're acid etched rather than hand engraved, which the originals were. And the colors are quite deceptive in terms of matching the originals. No, we don't know who's making them.
And for everybody else's benefit, that was the discussion of the forgeries, the Mauritius reprints that Chris showed at the early part of his talk. Right, on the Louis asks, on the slide with the Grenada fake cover, could you give more insight about which mechanism or technique you used to determine that the cancel was made with pencil? Well,
one, we would compare it with the genuine cancels, and it's not quite correct. And actually, it's I say pencil. It's possibly sort of crayon and pencil, etc. It's made. But no, it was certainly. It is not a genuine cancel. And as I say, that cover never went anywhere near Grenada, I would suspect. So.
Okay, thank you. Ken asks, will forgeries ever be valuable for being unique if there aren't as many as the original printed stamps?
I don't think they'll ever be quite the same, although one or two forgeries fetch certainly as much as the genuine. If you have a Sorati £2 Australia kangaroo, I think they fetch, I don't know, $5,000 or something like that, Australian dollars probably. So there are some extremely expensive forgeries, and of course the really expensive forgeries are the postal forgeries, so which are genuine in their era to fool the post office as opposed to fool the collector. And I don't know if you collect Lombardy Venetia, for instance, the postal forgeries of Lombardy Venetia, often covers with those on are more money than the genuine.
Okay, I'm going to save Andrew Chung's question for a moment, because I have a question for you that was put in the chat by Brandon Allison, and it's a very useful question, Chris. He asks that he submitted a stamp for to the Royal for opinion back in 1993. He personally has never fully felt satisfied with the opinion. So what is the process for resubmitting a stamp to the experts committee?
I think he says exactly what he said there, and that is, I'm not convinced that this is the opinion is correct. Will you have another look at it? And we would do so. We normally, I mean, we take a lot of time and effort to try and get things right. Our goal is to seek the truth. And that doesn't mean we always get it right, but we normally have a decent reason for coming to the conclusion we do. And we would indeed have records as to why we came to that conclusion. We would have photographs of the stamp, and we would have our worksheets as to why we thought it, what we said, what we did. And so, yes, send it back and we'll have another look.
Thank you. And Andrew Chung is obviously thinking about forging things, because he says, can you remove an overprint?
Some overprints, yes. Well, some overprints are actually remarkably easy to remove. Particularly, the most difficult are probably black. And modern ones are normally easier in terms of the ink is probably more volatile than the old, you know, a heavy typographed overprint is more difficult to remove, and has probably got an impression on, you know, it's punched into the paper as well. But it's remarkable what can be removed, put it that way.
Okay.
And one of the things you don't always know is how it's happened. You know, we can't always tell you what somebody has done, even if we are strongly of the belief that something has been fiddled with.
Okay. Lynn asks another question, and I'm keeping an eye on the time because we've only got a couple of minutes left. I'd like this to be the final question, ladies and gentlemen, because of time constraints. Chris, Lynn asks, besides sharing knowledge via trusted sources such as stamp societies and philatelic communities, how can we guide existing or new collectors on how to detail forgeries? Are there tools or technology that are available to the general public?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. I mean, the main thing is knowing your subject and having a level of cynicism. Many things you find are too good to be true, and if they're too good to be true, then they're probably not. You know, that expensive official overprint you've bought on eBay for virtually nothing is probably not a good buy. It's probably a bad buy. Getting to know your stamps is and don't get the impression that there are many forgeries around. You have seen a selection here of things that we deal with. A significant proportion are not bad. And so you have seen, if you like, an unfair cross section here. These have been picked out to show you what can happen. They are not a representative sample of what one sees on a day-to-day basis. So I don't think it, on the whole, it's as a widespread. But if you're certainly, if you're spending a lot of money on an item, you probably do want a second opinion from somebody with the expertise to who you would trust.
Right, thank you, Chris. I'm now going to conclude the questions and answers. Thank you all very much for raising questions. I'm now going to hand back to Richard Stock to make some closing remarks. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Chris, this has been a first-class presentation. You've taken us through what is an extremely complex and at times difficult process, because we're not dealing simply with forgeries, we're dealing with fakes. And I think faking aspects of a stamp or a cover is something that gives the faker so many opportunities, and there's such a variety of material that can be faked in so many different ways, that you've dealt with the major and described the major instances of forgery and faking, some of the famous ones, and of course you've touched on the fact that the Royal has very extensive records which are absolutely invaluable when faced with things that you think have been seen before. The way in which you've described the process is, I think, has been extremely erudite. You put a lot of time into this, and your expertise and knowledge is so widespread. I don't think that there's many people who can come near it as far as this particular subject is concerned. On behalf of everybody who's seen this presentation, and we've had over 120 people joining us for it, may I express our sincere gratitude to you for explaining the work of the Royal Philatelic Society London's expert committee. And I hope that as a result of this, those who have experienced this presentation will have a much better knowledge of the nature of the subject, its complexity, and the difficult situation that you're sometimes faced with in the time that has to be taken to examine a patient and in reaching a conclusion. Thank you very much indeed for giving us this superb presentation this afternoon.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chris. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is now 5 o'clock, and I understand that we have to now finish the presentation. So I hope that you all enjoyed the interesting chat. I'm going to wish you a pleasant afternoon, morning or evening according to where you are. Enjoy the rest of Virtual Stampex, and if you'd like to chat to anybody from the Royal, please do drop by the Royal stand, which is stand B2, and click on that chat link. We have booth representatives around the clock, yeah, throughout the whole of Virtual Stampex. So do drop by and chat to us. We'll be very glad to help you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.